cut the arts, baby, you cut the heart strings off the body that freedom rings. If you cut arts to fund war, look, what are we fighting for? You tell us to paint houses and not to paint a canvas. You'd rather see me in encampments than exceeding on a campus. Without art, how you gonna dance when you ace that math test? Who's gonna sing your praises when you get that high mark? Without art, we're prone to draw guns, act to sing war cries, dance around the issues, model only ignorance. You wanna stop violence? Pick up some violins. You see, those who draw good are the last to draw blood. Those who throw pots were the last to throw shots. So when you cut the arts, baby, you cut the heart strings off the body that freedom rings. Welcome to They. I'm Rob. So I just wanted to introduce the show a little bit and frame it, I think, in a context specific to this place and what makes it distinctive and such a valuable part of the community. And as you just hear what we just heard about the power of art and not just how it relates to the artist making, but the people around them, the process of it, and then also how it affects the audience, right? There's so many people that are affected when someone gets to make art. But one of the things that's really difficult, I think a lot of times when we conversate about this idea of diversity, a lot of times it kind of comes with this, what I'd like to call these oppression Olympics, where rather than like thinking about how to empathize with one another, we sort of like tend to compete with one another. Like, you know, you're a person of color, I've been through this in my life, and I've been through this in my life. And so what winds up happening is when we compete, we become less like, hey, I know what that feels like, tell me more. And we become more like, hey, let me tell you why mine is worse, right? And so I think that's really important because at the end of the day, what we really want to do is we really just want to make art, right? We really want to see it. We really want to be able to hear each other's stories. And there's such a blessing that comes through that process. And so being a person that comes from where I come from a really poor neighborhood in Philadelphia that was mostly black and Hispanic people, going through that process and going through school and not seeing very many faces like mine, what it made me realize is there's this big gap in the world where there's not that many people who have the opportunity to have this blessing that we all have. And so I've made it my mission, and folks like the world-renowned Sana Musasamo, who's here, has made it her mission. Can we give her a round of applause? That I get to do what I do, and I hope that somehow I become relevant, and I personally can just be a part of a larger community of artists who look like me and who are making art about whatever it is that they want to make art about. So the idea behind this show is the diversity within diversity. I think a lot of times when we think about the idea of being a person of color, we think, okay, that person's going to be making work about identity. It's going to be about like, this thing and that thing and this thing. But we're all so different, right? Like if you look at Courtney Leonard's work, that's right over here. Courtney Leonard, who's in the back corner, the yellow piece. She's an indigenous artist who's making work about water rights in her community. And I think one of the things that happens with an artist like this is she's not making work that maybe looks like what we'd identify as traditional indigenous Native American art. And so a lot of times when you see this work, if you're just working completely visually, the person's work is not really seen in the right context, because we're assuming that this work is not made by an indigenous person, because if it was, it would look a certain way. And so we have so many of those sort of like trends and themes throughout here where we do float in and out. Like when I started making art, one of the things that happened is I am a Puerto Rican from... I'm a Puerto Rican from the hood, okay? And I do graffiti and I rap, and I fit just about every single conceivable stereotype for a person of color, right? And so I'm making art in this, but the truth is that I can't make anything else. Like I tried, like for the longest time, all I painted on my pots were birds, and I love birds. And the reason why is because every time I would paint them, I would get really supportive feedback from my peers. And it was because it related to something that was within their aesthetics and what they were interested in. And so eventually I figured out that that wasn't really saying who I was. And through this process of making ceramics, I was able to find my voice and why what I had to say was important, why it was chartered part of the territory. And so I think one thing that would be really great, because we have Lauren here too, is if maybe Lauren, if you could share a little bit about what you have in here, and then I'll talk a little bit about my pieces, and then we'll sort of close out from there. So if you want to share, you have a few pieces in here, right?
Yeah, sure. I have these two pieces kind of in front of me here, and they're two pieces. They're from a series I call Centuripe series, and they're inspired from these objects from antiquity, from Centuripe, Sicily. And with my work, I use the vessel, the format of the vessel, to deconstruct mythologies. And for me, the vessel is really a stand-in for the body, whether it's an individual body or collective body or bodies of land or governing bodies and such. And so with these pieces, I was in part inspired by these objects of antiquity because I have, my mother's family is from that area of Sicily, and I was looking for objects that I had a personal cultural relationship to. But then in studying them further and studying objects from ancient Rome and ancient Greece, I became more interested in this idea of deconstructing mythology, specifically with this idea of what this time of antiquity was. And there's this idea of it being a time of a homogeneous culture, when the reality is quite opposite from that. It was a time of multicultural, multi-ethnic, where you can be Roman and be Northern European or Ethiopian or Egyptian or apart from the Middle East, and you can still be Roman. So it's about this idea of this mono-ethnic time of antiquity is really created in this 18th, 19th century Eurocentric canon of art history. And so this work is essentially trying to deconstruct those ideas, and then these sort of personal elements on top of that, and different narratives that I'm creating by the different objects that I put on them that has to do with commodity, trade, migration, diasporas, and so on. So maybe I'll stop there. All right, thank you.
Sets of work here. I have this teapot that was commissioned actually for this exhibition, so I'm really excited about it. But this, I guess, would be what would be more of my traditional work, what I've been working on historically. And so one of the reasons why I started working with decorative European ceramics is because I try to, regardless of where I go, I try to put myself back into the place of who I was before I ever worked with clay. And when I was walking through the library, I saw this book of Worcester porcelain, and my immediate reaction was, that looks expensive, right? So regardless of its history or these things, it was like something that I didn't feel comfortable touching, right? That I would sort of hold at a certain value and esteem. And so I said, well, I can make that, and then I can put my face on it. What would that say, right? So I'm sort of thinking a little bit about who gets to own these things. Historically, porcelain was considered more valuable than gold. And there was wars fought over, and there was people killed over the recipe for porcelain. And so thinking a little bit about this history and people that were so wealthy that they could afford to have these things, and what they decided to put on them. And now that we're sort of in this place in history where I have the autonomy and agency to be able to make those decisions and choose who I get to put on there. Put people who I think are the most influential people in the world, people that have really paved the way for someone like me to have the opportunities that I have. And so when I was commissioned for this teapot, and they said, we'd really like to see Jimi Hendrix and B.B. King, I was like, hell yeah. So these three pieces in the back, similar with that idea of thinking about porcelain, I was thinking about a few of the most iconic types of imagery that we have in ceramics, and you can see a little bit in Jennifer's work here of the blue and white sort of porcelain that we sort of relate to. Take away all the ceramic history knowledge that you have. If you were to see that sort of pattern, you think somehow ceramic, right? And if you see this pattern, you think ceramic. So a lot of times I try to break things down as simply as I can to say if someone had no experience with ceramics whatsoever, they can sort of still be able to find themselves in this work. So I'm thinking a little bit about that idea of accessibility and who even gets to participate in this. And so in this particular case, I have these three sort of forms that are similar to Della Robbia, which is a Maiolica manufacture that was happening during the Renaissance. And so I'm taking these very traditional forms, and just like I'm doing on my teapot, featuring people who maybe normally wouldn't be put on there, Della Robbia was generally done sort of commissioned for sort of Christian relics. And so I'm then taking these images and putting myself, Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubman in these positions, and then thinking a little bit about this idea of like, what do those patterns represent? And we're taking all these different things from all these different cultures and putting them together. But what's new is that we're included in that conversation. And that maybe we haven't been historically, but right now is the time for us to be able to have a voice. And so that's what this entire exhibition is about. So I hope you take the time to read what a lot of the artists wrote. Malcolm Mobutu Smith wrote a letter to his father over there, which, you know, like I admire a lot of these artists, and a lot of times I don't really know exactly what it is that drives them to make the things they make. And so it's really amazing to like be a part of this. And, you know, honestly, I look around and I'm like, I get to be in a show with all these people. So it's really, being an artist is really humbling in that like you never get over, the fact that that, you know, people care about what you have to say. You know, you almost feel like you've lived your whole life with like nobody really caring about it, and then eventually you might get to this point where people are asking you what your opinion is on things. And I'm like, you really want to know what I have to say? So I just feel really grateful to be in this show. And then I thought one of the other things I could do for some of the younger emerging artists here is I can sort of share 10 things that I've learned since I've been a ceramic artist, and 10 things that I've sort of learned through this process. So there's this rapper that I really love. His name's Notorious B.I.G. He has a song that he has called the 10 Crack Commandments. And I wrote this on my 36th birthday, the 10 things I've learned since being an artist. So number 10, watch how you make your ends. You see cash can buy Benz, but it can't buy friends. And 9, yo, keep your ambition in line. If you're always looking forward, you can't buy back time. And 8, you might have to see some hate, because most things that you make, nobody relates. And 7, yo, watch out for dudes named Kevin. They're going to come in different names and offer you big fame. You trust in the wrong people, that brings you big pain. And 6, yo, you might have to take some licks, but there's a limit to that, dog. Don't take no shit. And 5, nobody's more important than your wife. Ignoring loved ones brings you big strife. And 4, yo, this rule you can't ignore. Believe in yourself, man. Of this I'm sure. And 3, look, this rule has got to be key. Being bitter is expensive. Being kind is free. And 2, look, just forget everything you knew, because all you know it all, you learn nothing new. You see, people going to try to rape you. Believe this, my friend. It don't matter how long it takes for you to get to the end, because if you keep making ones, the world's going to see you're a 10.